So hello everybody, welcome to the November webinar, The Truth About Being a Clinical Research Physician / Investigator. And this is the year that you want to do this. This is the year, whether you're a physician yourself, or you're a clinician, or you're a research site looking to recruit physicians, or you're a sponsor looking to recruit physicians as well. This is going to be important for you guys. What do you think about this, Chris?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure everybody can tell, but Dan has hopefully a cold, but possibly COVID.
Yeah, it's a cold. I mean, we don't know for sure, but I'm getting over what seems to have been a pretty bad cold. So yeah, it's been going around in my community. So
Right.
bear with me on the voice, because the voice is, I sound worse than I am. I'm actually feeling good, but I cough every now and then. But we're going to make sure that we deliver this to you guys like stuffing on Thanksgiving.
Oh.
So
Yeah. The stuffing have oysters or no oysters? I don't like oysters.
I've never had stuffing with oysters. Do they do that?
Oh, yeah. It's very popular.
Okay. Well, in either case, maybe that's for next year to try.
There you go.
But what we want to cram into your brains, guys and gals, is really what it means to be a clinical research physician. And feel free to use these slides. Okay, just we're not going to email you the PowerPoint, but you'll have the replay. The replay is going to be sent to everybody. So just screenshot every screen that we discuss, and then you can make your own slides that way. But basically, feel free to share it with clinicians in your area, because oftentimes they ask questions about this stuff. Hey, well, it seems intriguing to do research, but what does it actually mean? And this is the unbiased as we could possibly be. We tried to list everything on here. So we can go to slide number 2 and kind of see what we got. And Chris, I'm going to ask you if you could read most of the slides, and I'll do color commentary because my voice is giving out.
Certainly. All right. So, principal investigator responsibilities. The principal investigator, or PI, is a physician at the clinical research site who is responsible for everything that happens at the site. This may seem like a large responsibility, but there are ways to delegate responsibilities to study staff and focus on patients. Some of the typical PI responsibilities include training study staff, reviewing safety labs, EKGs, X-rays, etc., making sure patients qualify for studies, explaining the study to patients, and following the study protocol, amongst many other things.
Right. And it seems like, so basically the PI is responsible for the entire conduct of a clinical trial, which obviously seems like it's overwhelming to many. But the way I explain it, and Chris and I just did a Zoom call with a future PI of ours for one of our sites that we're going to open. The way we explain it is, look, this is our job. Our job is to make sure that the research operations are running efficiently so that you can just continue being a doctor, right? You continue seeing the patients, your own patients in your private practice. That's going to actually help us in the research side. And then for the research patients, you just continue to be a doctor, review safety labs, EKGs, adverse events, make the determination of whether the study is still safe for the patient, and follow the protocol and explain the study to the patients. But anything that's not clinical, that doesn't require a physician, we will do, us and our staff, our coordinators, and then the research staff. So you really are just continuing to be a doctor. That's really the easiest way to explain the responsibilities to them.
Well, I would throw a caveat in there. So the PI has to delegate these tasks because the PI is ultimately responsible for everything. So if anything goes wrong in the study, the PI is essentially to blame. I mean, it's not truthfully their fault. Say the coordinator makes a mistake or something, but the PI is ultimately responsible for that mistake.
Right.
Now, that may seem significant, but it really isn't in the real world in terms of, say, the physician's medical license. They're not in any jeopardy in terms of their clinic side. They're not going to lose their license unless, like, they kill somebody intentionally. I mean, it would have to be something just very drastic for them to put their license in jeopardy. Just getting in trouble on the research side for minor errors or even larger errors, there's no danger to their license.
That's correct. That is correct. And when it comes to things like training staff and ensuring that the protocol is being followed, you really need a good study coordinator or somebody who knows what they're doing to run the show so that you truly can just be a physician, right? And Dr. Al Jazirely, who's our partner on the Clinical Scoop, we discuss this with him all the time. You know, being a research physician is different than being a regular private practice physician in the sense that you spend more time with your research patients than you would your private practice patients. It's a more thorough examination. It's more thorough questionnaires. It's more thorough AE assessments. Everything is more thorough in research.
And I believe Dan's using the term you in general. So you would be the PI or anybody the PI has delegated those responsibilities to.
Right. And by the way, any questions, type them in the chat box. I don't think there's a way to unmute yourself, but feel free to chat if you feel so inclined.
And we only have 2 people on phone, so pretty much everybody has the capability to type a question in.
Type away, guys and gals, and let's go to slide 3, study startup.
All right, study startup. One of the few things that a new PI might be concerned about is study startup. There are many documents that need attention before a site can begin seeing patients. In sponsored research, the PI does not need to deal directly with the institutional review board during study startup, Instead, sponsored research typically has a central IRB. Site must submit initial submission which documents how much experience the site has in clinical research and to what extent. So I'll start off. The first bullet point is documentations are all the study startup regulatory, 1572s, financial disclosure forms, CVs, IRB initial submission, and I suppose you could even throw the contract and budget into that as well. So there's a lot of initial paperwork that needs to be done before the site is allowed to screen a patient.
Right. And this part's important, and then we're actually dedicating 2 slides to study startup because this is usually one of the objections that new physicians bring up is, well, I hear there's a lot of paperwork and a lot of regulatory. And the answer to that objection is, yes, you're absolutely right, but we're handling this work. So really, you're just signing these documents, and it's just a matter of you learning what these documents really are so that you know what you're signing. So on the next slide, we actually have examples. We should just go there now. The next slide, we have examples on slide 4 of some of these things, right? And then we even have a little screenshot of a 1572 form, which is one of the most important forms of startup, is this 1572 form. So the good thing about being a physician is you learn this stuff once, the study startup, and it's all the same. Every study, it's the same process, right? You've got 1572, you've got financial disclosure forms, you've got medical licenses, you've got CVs, you've got IRB questionnaires. Okay, that's on the study startup side. It gets a little more complicated on the site initiation visit side, where you start getting into things like training logs and delegation of authorities logs. But even that, you just learn it once, and you know how to do this stuff going forward. So then you can just outsource this to your staff. This is what your study coordinator is for. This is what people like me and Chris are for.
And I will add that some sponsors have additional documentation that they require, but the majority of this is very simple. I'd say there's only two items that have any sort of learning curve whatsoever, and that's the 1572 and an initial submission to the IRB. Everything else is very straightforward, very easy to comprehend and understand. Those are the only two documents in which questions may arise, in my opinion, 1572 and the initial submission form to the IRB.
Yeah, and that 1572 form is your contract. You, as the physician, that is your promise to the FDA that you are responsible for the study. So that's probably the scariest form that you have to sign, and that's why it's the most important form. But really, it's just a promise that you're maintaining oversight of the study, and you're maintaining oversight over your staff. It doesn't mean that you personally are supposed to do everything. It means that you personally are responsible for everything.
In accordance with the protocol, specifically to that protocol.
To the protocol and to GCP, good clinical practice, so yes. The next bullet point, you want to read that one? Or no, this is all about the 1572. So what are some of the other stuff? You mentioned the IRB questionnaire, financial disclosure forms. These are for the study startup, right? So once you've been accepted for a study, but before you've been initiated for the study, this is called the study startup regulatory phase.
So the initial component to this is budget and contract. A lot of sponsors will have you work on budget and contract at the same time you're working on startup regulatory. I oftentimes for the sites that we own, tell them that we're not going to work on regulatory until we have agreement on the budget, because what's the point? If you can't come to an agreement on the budget, you're wasting your time on regulatory. And I always assure them that we'll have the regulatory done the same day we have agreement on the budget. Again, once you've done the regulatory, it's relatively straightforward and simple, and it can be done relatively quickly. All the documents take no more than an hour once you're accustomed to them.
This is right. The process becomes simpler and less intimidating once you go through it once. That's really all it takes. The next slide is going to be about how you pull all this off. Because as you can see as a physician, all the responsibility falls on your shoulder, but no physician actually does all that stuff themselves, right? So it comes down to hiring the right staff, or in cases like Chris and I, most other research clinics across the country, partnering with the right people. And Chris will read off these bullet points, and then we'll provide some color to it.
Hi, excuse me. Hiring the right staff. Hiring the right staff will not only help with study startup, it will make running the study a lot easier. Studies generally have the same process for startup, which means that the PI can rely on the same individuals to start any study. Any site directors or site owners can also help the PI by making sure the coordinators and study staff are well trained. If there is a delegation of authority log, then the PI can designate specific study tasks to staff. And I misread that, but you get the point. Study staff can take care of regulatory documents, screening and enrollment logs, or IRB reports. So I think almost always there's going to be a delegation of authority log. I've yet to see a study that didn't have one. I suppose if the PI is doing everything on their own, there doesn't need to be one. I suppose if the studies, I've seen some peculiar things in phase 4 studies, in which there's no 1572, so there may not be a delegation of authority log in certain phase 4 studies, but for the most part, you're going to have a delegation of authority log.
Right. Right. And, in theory, all you need for a study, like you said, is a principal investigator. But in practice, I've only heard of that happening once where the PI is doing all the work themselves and they don't have a coordinator. I've
Yep.
never personally even witnessed it. I've just heard it through someone else telling me this story. So it's definitely not common. 99.9% of the time, the PI has staff to handle these things. And this is why understanding the process as a PI is something that you're going to want to do, and why Chris and I give all of the PIs that partner with us a copy of our book, The Comprehensive Guide to Clinical Research, because this gives you an overview of the process. So if you understand the process, right, it doesn't mean you have to do every aspect of that process, but if you understand the process, you can properly delegate and properly have oversight over the process. Maybe you don't have people you've partnered with that are like me or Chris. Maybe you are the physician trying to start your own site and you're starting from scratch. So it becomes even more important for you to understand the process yourself when it comes to this, if that makes sense. Because this stuff can be overwhelming, but at the end of the day, it's really not once you do it. Once you get it done once, it becomes much simpler. And really, it's all about delegation of authorities, and then training. And it really boils down to having a good study coordinator that can manage the process. A good coordinator is worth their weight in gold. This is why we have the CRC Academy to help sites train their staff. This is what's going to take care of most of the heavy lifting for you as a physician. But it's important for you to understand these things.
I couldn't agree more. And I think what makes this kind of difficult, especially for research naive staff, is, one, when you have both PI and study coordinator are naive, it's all of the tasks come on at one time, right? They're sending the budget and contract, the regulatory documents, when can we schedule our SIV? I mean, they're just pushing, and it seems overwhelming. Again, if you're new, you can always ask for time. You can say, we take this one step at a time. You can reach out to Dan and I. We're more than happy to guide you through these processes. It's not all that difficult. It just seems overwhelming initially.
Right, which is why many physicians decide not to do it, because they just think, well, this is going to be a drastic difference to my current workflow, because it seems like it's going to be a drastic change to your current workflow as a physician. But in reality, it's not. It's not going to be. If you do it the right way, your best bet is to continue doing your private practice the way you have been doing it and delegate to other staff to handle the research side while you just maintain oversight.
I think it's in combination with that. Just when a physician takes on their first study, everything seems overwhelming and very time inclusive. It takes a lot of their time. I think the second part of that is they just don't know what they're doing, and neither does their staff. So they wind up making mistakes that are very much frowned upon, and they just completely lose interest in research. I didn't sign up for getting chewed out by a CRA, which CRAs rarely do that to a PI, but they will do it to CRCs. So, it's just not something they sign up for. So, strongly recommended if your staff and yourself as a PI are new, you just take on one study initially.
Occasionally, you will get some nasty CRAs that do like to chew out PIs too.
Sure.
I mean, it will happen.
Without a doubt. I've never seen it, but I've certainly heard of it.
Yeah, it will just be something that you're going to have to realize, hey, this can happen. CRAs can give you a hard time, but just understand at the end of the day, the CRAs, which monitor the studies, are there for your benefit and for your protection. They're protecting you from the FDA auditors.
That's right.
And the FDA auditors may not chew you out, but the FDA auditors can write warning letters and that can cause you to or the site to have either fines or just be blacklisted from research.
Fines? I've never heard of fines.
Yeah, there's fines associated with some. If
Findings?
there, it would depend on what the issues were,
Hmm.
but
Interesting. I didn't.
usually the liability goes onto the research clinic in those cases. But there have been fines given back
Now I'm
into the
curious.
site.
Now you sparked my curiosity. Have you heard of a site getting fined, and if so, for what? And how much was the fine?
I have heard of that, not personally. Um, but let's just Google it right now. Uh, while you read the next slide, I'll Google it. Okay.
All right. All right. Help from sponsors. Sponsors have a responsibility to help make sure that the PI is well trained on the study protocol. Sponsors will also train study staff on the protocol during the site initiation visit. This means that the PI is not the only person who will provide training on the study protocol. Sponsors also provide many resources which the site can use to make sure that the study is being run properly, one of which is the site's monitor. Sponsors also provide study supplies. So, absolutely, Dan and I have been discussing these items. It is the sponsor's responsibility, as well as the PI's, to make sure the PI is trained on the study protocol. I think what Carlos is trying to say here is that the sponsor will take it on their shoulders, as they should, to make sure at the site initiation visit that they run through the slides for the protocol and make sure there's a good opportunity to ask questions for the PI and study staff. Make sure everybody's fully knowledgeable on what is entailed in the protocol and how the study is to be carried out. The slides are not the entire protocol. They're just the key components to the protocol, such as inclusion and exclusion criteria. Typically, you'll have any other major concerns the sponsor has with the study that they need to make certain the site is aware of. These sponsors also provide. And as we discussed, the monitor is certainly a resource. The first person you should call if you run into any concerns about the protocol during the course of working on the trial is your CRA. Oftentimes they won't know the answer to your question, but they'll find it out for you. Back when I worked as a coordinator for a while, many years ago, I oftentimes would call CRA and say, hey, what do I do here? The protocol is not very specific or not clear, and CRA would say, good question. I have no idea what the answer is to that. And then they would get the project manager into the conversation, and that way we could have a resolution on how we approach this particular item. And in terms of study supplies, the sponsor, yes, provides, well, not always do they provide everything you need, but usually. The items that they do not typically provide are on the lab side. You'll probably need cotton balls, Band-Aids, and things of that nature, tourniquets. They oftentimes don't provide those items, but they provide the lab kits in terms of the tubes for the blood that need to be drawn and the shipping containers for the labs, things of that nature. If it's a very small study, they may not provide all of the regulatory documentation that's needed. You might have to create a few items for yourself. Dan and I are working on a couple of studies right now for sponsors that they didn't provide everything necessary, so the site had to create these themselves, documents. But typically, 90, probably 8% of the time, everything's provided that you'll need for the most part, outside of the necessary lab supplies. So Dan, did you find?
Yeah, most of the fines are on the investigator-initiated side. So typically, the FDA will fine sponsors, but they will send warning letters, and they can recommend criminal prosecution for misdemeanor for misdemeanor convictions. Felony convictions, they can, like, if they find fraud, then they could fine the research sites as well. But as far as like just things that would trigger a warning letter, like a deviations and the like, those will not, the sites won't get fined for that. But if there's some criminal elements there, misdemeanor or felony, they could be fined and or imprisoned.
And those type of things are like making up patients that don't exist and
Right.
endangering patients. Like, of course,
Falsifying data.
right. Working on a study or as a patient participating in research, there's always a certain element of danger involved. So if something goes wrong, you're not to blame there as a PI. It's if you're endangering, for example, let's say there's and the term's escaping me, a prohibited medication, and it's, what is it when the medications are very dangerous to one another?
Contraindicated.
Yes, contraindicated, thank you. That you allow a patient to participate in a study and you're fully aware that these medications are contraindicated, that could be an issue. I don't think there would be criminal charges in any way unless the patient died because of that. But it certainly would be a problem in an FDA audit. But again, I don't think there would be a fine involved with that. Again, unless the patient
Right.
died.
The fines for the fines come from the sponsor side for non-compliance mostly, but there can be fines for sites. But I've never had it experienced. Luckily, I've never experienced that, and I haven't even heard of people that I know that have experienced FDA fines.
Yeah,
So you have to do something pretty serious for that to happen.
and that's why I was curious. That's when you had said that. It seemed out of the usual.
Yeah, so maybe not a good thing to lead with your PI, but if you're a physician, now you know the truth. The real truth and nothing but the truth about being a clinical research physician.
There you go. And
What
we have
slide are we on now?
we have a few questions, or actually it looks like they've been answered. I missed these. Sorry I joined late due to other issues. Are you going to send out the link to the presentation? Yes, there'll be a link
You
chain.
are forgiven for being late. Just don't let it happen again.
Okay, and then it's just people conversating with themselves.
And I'm just kidding.
We'll move on.
Yeah.
All right. Concerns about clinical research. Some physicians are concerned about patients getting placebo. While this is true for some of the study participants, others might get experimental drugs. The PI will need to monitor the patient progress to ensure patient safety. Somebody typed in a question or a statement, and I read that while I was reading the slide. So anyhow, the PI will need to monitor the patient progress to ensure patient safety. So, and this is true. Usually, there is no placebo if the study involves a patient perishing from not receiving treatment. Oncology is a good example, cardio, any number of trials in which the patient's not receiving some sort of treatment, there's a good chance they may perish. There's not typically going to be a placebo in that. But any other type of disease, there certainly can be a placebo. So the patient definitely can worsen. And as the bullet point states, the PI needs to stay on top of this and make sure that the patient is safe and that they're not experiencing any problematic or problems due to placebo. Did we lose you, Dan?
No, that's right. Usually physicians are concerned about the placebo aspect. And like you said, it's just a matter of letting them know, hey, first of all, it's voluntary for the patients to be in the study. And second of all, you can take them out as the PI anytime as well.
Even if they don't want to get out. Yeah, even if they don't want to leave, you can make them leave.
That's why you're the PI. This is why I say, like, your job as a PI will really be no different than your job as a physician. I mean, patient safety is number one priority.
Yeah, Dan and I, oftentimes our principal investigators work in psychiatric studies, and there have been times when the patients are I can't think of the term again. I didn't get much sleep last night, but they're worsening. They're decompensating. Thank you. And they don't want to leave the study because they get paid to participate. And again, the PI has to make this determination: is it safe for them to continue? So
Right.
And oftentimes it's not.
Oftentimes it's not, and they go back on standard of treatment. Even if
Mm-hmm.
it's against the patient's will, it's the PI is the one who's running the study.
Right.
The next slide, slide 8, more concerns about research. There may be some concerns about patient adverse events, right? Adverse reactions to study drugs, which then leaves, in the idea of the physicians, maybe leaves the PI liable. So it's important to know the PI will not be held liable as long as they're following the protocol and good clinical practice. It's called indemnification, and it's in
Mm-hmm.
every contract. You have to
That's
ask
not
for
the,
it, but it's in
yeah.
every contract.
There you go.
You have to have someone like Chris ask for it. Again, if you're a PI, you need to either partner with someone that knows what they're doing or figure out what you're doing yourself.
Yep.
Clinical research is very thorough when it comes to patient safety. Like Dr. Al Jazairli said, and I mentioned earlier, it's much more thorough. You get much more complete care as a patient by being in a study than you do just as a regular patient in someone's private practice, for the most part. Even though it's not considered patient care because it's a research, you're still getting thorough examinations, much more so than you would as a regular patient. I mean, you're getting everything, comprehensive panels, EKGs almost at every visit. It's just above and beyond what's standard of care
Mm-hmm.
as far as safety oversight. And it's not uncommon for sponsored labs to detect patient risk factors. We've had several patients in trials, because we do psychiatric trials, and a lot of these patients are from lower socioeconomic background, and they don't really have good health care at all. And we didn't diagnose, but because of research, we've detected abnormalities in their lab that then we would send to the physician of the patient, and they would diagnose a new condition that they would otherwise never have discovered.
Yeah. Very commonly, diabetes is, I'd say, one of the top ones.
Diabetes, hypercholesterolemia. We've discovered AIDS in a patient who didn't know they had AIDS before, HIV
Mm-hmm.
positive. So, this stuff is this is a very thorough care that the patients receive in research, even if they are on placebo.
Yep. No doubt.
Slide 9, I believe.
You would believe correctly.
I'll leave this one to you.
All right. Physicians with, I see, less bullet points in the previous slide.
There you go.
Physicians with private practices. Physicians with private practices tend to make great PIs. And this is absolutely true. Why? Because they have a built-in database. This is because they already know the patient history and they can make better recommendations about the participation in clinical trials. Also true. It becomes a lot easier to enroll their patients this way because there is already a patient-physician relationship. Also true. Patients that are referred are more challenging to enroll. Patients that are referred are more challenging to enroll. Patients that are referred because the PI will not be familiar with the patient's history.
We found a Carlos typo. He is going to be publicly humiliated today.
Yeah.
What he means to say is patients that are referred by outside physicians are more challenging to enroll than patients that are referred by the PI. Because when they're coming from outside clinicians, we don't have a background on the patient. And when they come from within the physician's private practice, we do have a background on the patient. So that's what Carlos means by that. It's if you're a physician with a private practice, your private practice, your database is very valuable in a clinical research context.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is what that bullet point means. But yeah, good catch, Chris. So if you've got a private practice and you're a physician, again, the best thing you can do business-wise is to continue managing your private practice as you would be and just partner with some researchers who know what they're doing. And you can I mean, the synergies there are 1+1=3 or beyond, because you're going to continue seeing your private practice patients. You need to continue expanding your own database anyways, because that's going to help your research arm in the long run as well.
Mm-hmm. Couldn't agree with you.
Slide 10 continues with this intriguing concept of
All right.
physicians with private practice.
If you're a physician running a private practice, you can easily create a second stream of income by expanding into clinical research. Sponsors pay for patient visits at a higher rate than private clinics typically charge. They not only pay sites, but they also pay patients for participation. Physicians who get involved in clinical research and have a clinic can look for opportunities for positions as key opinion leaders. Being part of studies allows clinics to brand themselves as having options outside of traditional care. And all are true.
All of these bullet points came up in our Zoom discussion earlier with the physician who looks like he's going to be joining us as a PI, right, at a new clinic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, literally all these things came up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, there's so many opportunities from a prestige standpoint, branding yourself as a key opinion leader, right? No longer just relying on being a high prescriber of a particular medication. I mean, that's one way to be a KOL, but also working on the research end of the new stuff that hasn't come out to market yet. That's another way to position yourself as a KOL. And if you're doing both, the best of both worlds, these sponsors are going to love to have you involved with them on the sales side and on the R&D side.
All right, next slide. And there's one important concept that hasn't been touched on yet. Maybe it's in the last slide.
The last slide is this one, slide 11.
Opportunities from working with sponsors. Sponsors share data about sites that perform well, and not so well as well. Sites that perform well are typically contacted again for repeat business. This is true, and the reverse is true. If you're not doing well at research and you're making multiple mistakes and errors, that word gets out too, so you're less likely to be contacted. The biggest error is not recruiting enough patients, not enrolling enough patients, excuse me. If you're a PI who knows the medical monitors or other sponsor level representatives, you may have the opportunity to have sponsors help you with investigator-initiated clinical trials. If this is the case, you can have your study sponsored, keep some publishing rights. Yep, very true. Any color?
The investigator-initiated aspect is also intriguing to, quite honestly, the physician that we discussed research with today. That this was our second discussion already. So he's going to be joining us as a PI. He's not necessarily doing it for the money. I mean, who doesn't want additional income? So there is an aspect of that to everybody, I think. But he's really interested in the investigator-initiated side. So he wants to build up his own research expertise to where he can start doing his own studies. He's got a lot of interesting ideas that he would like to develop and maybe collaborate with a manufacturer or a sponsor on. There's also the opportunity to get grants from the NIH, National Institute of Health. If you have a really good idea and you have a grant writer on your team, which is another aspect to research that we don't really get into because it's not industry-sponsored studies. Those are publicly sponsored studies. But the NIH provides grants every year to investigator-initiated trials as well.
Yep. And you don't necessarily have to have a grant writer on staff. There's many out there, so we'll handle this for you. But they are kind of pricey. I think they run from $10,000 to $25,000.
Yeah.
To write your grant proposal.
That's right, and they are pricey. But you can use some of the profits maybe you made from the industry-sponsored stuff if it's something really near and dear to your heart. Like a few doctors that we know, they use their industry-sponsored trials to fund their own investigator-initiated trials.
Yep.
So that is an option for you guys as well. Any questions?
Well, I would like to touch on one other concept here that I don't think was really brought up, but that is time, the time necessary of the PI to work on a clinical trial. And as we stated today, as the PI Dan's brought up a couple of different times that we spoke with, or potential PI, one study you're probably looking at, and again, and this all depends on how busy the study is in terms of what's required in the study and how many patients are enrolled. But I would say that the average amount of time a PI needs to invest into a research trial is about 1 hour in a study. It could be a little bit more if you're relatively busy. Maybe it's a couple hours.
Between 1 to 4 hours a week.
Again, it's be at 4 hours. It's going to be a very intensive study, lots of work,
Right.
Lots of work required by a physician or even specifically the PI. And then on top of that, you have a lot of patients enrolled to be at the 4-hour mark for one study.
Right.
So I remember not too long ago, we had a bunch of studies running and we were seeing, 15 patients a week, which is a fair amount of patients. And the PI maybe spent 4 hours a week on the study.
Right.
So again, it just depends on how intensive the study is.
How intensive it is, and honestly how successful the clinic gets to where you're starting to see that many patients and that many studies going on.
Right. And then sorry, go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I was just going to say the income generated is more than going to justify that.
Yeah, we've had we have to try and talk clients into keeping their private practice running because it's feeding research, because they just want to do research.
Right.
One, we couldn't talk into just doing both. She just went fully research because she said she had enough referral network and she didn't need to do practice anymore.
Right.
So it's highly advisable. Maybe you cut back on private practice, or maybe you employ a nurse practitioner or a PA to pick up some of your responsibility on that side, so you can focus more on research, possibly. But strongly advisable to keep your clinic open because it plays well to sponsors too. They see that as the source of your patients. So if you no longer have a private practice, it can be somewhat of a hindrance.
Right. And that in the case of that doctor, she was the owner of her site, right? So she was not an independent contractor with a site, to where if you're an independent contractor of a site, it wouldn't make sense for you to not continue your private practice.
Good point.
It really just makes sense if you are an owner of the site. Okay, that's a different story. But most doctors, when they start out, they're just going to be independent contractors.
But still, I'm not misleading our audience, as both of us did try to talk her into keeping her practice.
Yeah, we did. But that's easy for us to say. We don't have to do the work.
Right.
And deal with Medicare and who knows, all the other insurance companies out there. I know that stuff's getting harder for the doctors.
Absolutely.
Any questions on this beautiful Monday? Happy Monday to everybody.
No, there's no questions, at least thus far. Let's see. I'm starting a new research site in Dallas. I'm looking for a PI. Any suggestions? So we do have a question.
Yeah, I got plenty of suggestions. Get busy. Get on Google.
Yeah.
Get on Google.
Get busy. That's helpful.
No, seriously. Get on Google. Get on LinkedIn. Start sending 50 emails a day to clinicians in the area, even if it's to their private practice inbox. Call their office. Stop by their office if you want. That's a little weird during COVID times, but email works really well. LinkedIn, just mass email, right? And
Indeed works well too initially. I run a lot of Indeed ads for PIs, and I'll tell you, the first week, maybe 2 weeks, the ad works great. You get lots of responses, but it barely works after that for some reason. I think you need to take a break from it for maybe 2-3 months and then run another ad, because it seems that the responses just completely dry up.
Oh yeah, I think it gets pushed down to the bottom of the postings. Much like Craigslist when you post something new. But yeah, Indeed works. But I really want people to get out of their comfort zone and start reaching out on their own. because people are not doing that. We have these conversations with people that want to start sites, and they're just afraid to reach out to doctors. And you can't be successful if you don't get started.
Yeah, you got to be a salesperson.
There you go. It all comes down to sales.
And I only laughed because I thought you were going to end with get busy, not elaborate.
Oh, sure. I mean, I could end with get busy, but everybody's got Google. Just search internal medicine, family medicine, general practice, and then go specialties with your zip code and start approaching all those guys and gals. Cross-reference them on LinkedIn. Reach out to them there. See if they've posted anything. Find their Instagrams. I mean, just get busy.
Mm-hmm. Well, certainly.
And be ready to sell and be ready to have a bunch of objections and be ready to come back to this webinar as a reference. I apologize that my voice is not that great, but hey, screenshot the slides and make your own slideshow out of it. Better yet, screenshot the slides, make your own slideshow, and then record your own voice reading it, preferably when you don't have a cold, and send that to the doctors.
Your voice isn't that bad. You all can use Dan's voice.
Yeah, it was worse earlier. I had to blow my nose a few times.
That's why you disappeared?
That's why I muted my phone, yeah.
Okay. And thank you, Luis. Luis says great information.
Who?
Luis says great information.
Thank you, Luis. We appreciate you tuning in and hopefully it provides some value.
All right, so we have a follow-up to the Dallas. I have a doctor with no prior research experience that wanted to be PI. Would the sponsor shy away from PI without prior research experience? And the short answer is yes. However, it's like Dan said, get busy. You just have to keep plugging away.
Yeah, here's the answer to that. Yes. And now what? Like, the answer is yes. Sponsors would love to have your doctor have research experience, but your doctor doesn't. So now what? Right?
So
now what is where you make your money, because that's where you tell them we have a research naive patient population and the PI might not have research experience, but I'm the site director and this is my resume, blah, blah, blah. And there's never been a better time than 2020, 2021 to be a research naive physician.
Yeah, and what Dan means by that, I'll elaborate on that last statement, is sponsors will work with you as your entire site can be research naive. They will work with you if they're in need. And that's what Dan means by that. Right now, they are in need. There's a lot of studies out there. So they'll overlook many of your negatives, right, or the positives. And the positives in this case are, as Dan just mentioned, you have a research-naive patient population, and hopefully your PI for whatever study that they're considering you for has a lot of patients that qualify. So those are all important components. And I see here James says, and I'm a CRA with 10 years of experience, try to open a site. So, of course, that's an added bonus, your 10 years of experience. So you can speak the language of research. So if they should come out for a site selection visit, they'll know that not everybody there is research naive. They'll know the physician is, but they'll be more comfortable in the fact that here's this person, lots of experience, can offer guidance to the PI in terms of what's necessary in research. But again, in my opinion, it all boils down to timing. Is there a lot of studies out there so that sponsors are going to take a chance on a research naive position, which that answer is yes. But still, you're going to get sponsors that are not interested in research naive positions. But I promise you, there are sponsors out there that will take that chance.
Yeah.
Direct experience with this.
Direct. Our doctor we're partnering with, that we're going to partner with, is research naive. It's like not even on my top 10 list of concerns for starting that site. You're only research naive once, and that's it. So it just takes one study to get going.
Now, to be fully open here, there's a big difference between the Dr. Dan's referring to that we discussed research with today and where you're at, James. Dallas is a little bit more competitive. Where we're looking, there is no competition. So sponsors are going to be more interested in where we're at. Again, though, I don't think that's a complete disaster for you in terms of just where we're at right now with the studies.
There's not enough sites to handle these studies that are out there, and it looks like they're just going to continue to become more studies as 2020 ends and 2021 comes up.
Yep. Oftentimes what you need to do, at least this is what we did with our last research naive physician, you just take a study you can't get patients for, just so you can put experience on the PI's, on the PI CV. And that's not going to look good with that particular sponsor or CRO. You may have kind of negated any future opportunities with them.
Burned the bridge.
Now, but I'm sorry, what did you say, Dan?
Yeah, you may have burned the bridge.
Yes, exactly. But now you have research experience, and that's what matters to everybody else. So now you have some.
Yeah, I just read an article. Like, it costs a sponsor $30 to $50,000 to activate one site in an average study.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I would think it might even be a little bit more.
Yeah, this was a 2017 article, so it might be more now, but that's what it was. And so let's just say $50,000 per site to activate. So they want to see some patients from you if they're gonna activate you. So if you don't enroll any patients, you are nothing. You are literally a liability to them.
Yep. What I strongly recommend to our clients who are research naive is take any study you can get at least one patient for, regardless of how many patients you promise them. Let's say you promise 10, as long as you get them one patient, you won't be a complete negative to them. They will consider you in the future.
Right. Yeah, one patient's good. It's still data, and you're no longer a liability.
Yeah, you didn't keep your word that you would get them 10 patients, so you're not going to be the first site they come to in the future, but they will come back to you.
Right.
Your best bet is to get more patients than you promised, and then you go on oftentimes go on what's called a preferred site list. So they come to you first. That's ideal. But again, when you're research naive, you may not have that opportunity, and you just got to get some experience.
That's right. Always lead with your strengths. If you have a big patient database, that's a strength. If you have an experienced coordinator, that's a strength. If you're a CRA with 10 years of experience, that's obviously a strength.
And James says maybe we start with a phase 4 study, and sure, if that's what you can get, you absolutely start with that. I would start with whatever you can get first.
Exactly. Exactly. That whole phase 4 strategy is a great strategy in like a normal market where there's not an extreme amount of studies. We're not in a normal market. Turn on the news, guys. We are not living in normal times. In case anyone's confused, this is not normal market. This is a extremely busy clinical research market. There's just not enough sites, not enough patients to fulfill the studies that are out there, and not to mention the ones coming out.
Yep.
We're not in a normal market.
I can't recall the last phase 4 study I saw. I think it's been nearly a year. I don't even know if I'm running phase 4 studies right now, because the purpose of a phase 4 study is really marketing, right? Let's get lots of patients into these studies so that the doctors get used to utilizing whatever we're doing, whatever the study is based on, whether it be a device or a product or drug. It requires patients to come to the office, and lots of patients aren't coming to the office right now. So I don't think sponsors are really running phase 4 trials right now. Again,
it's true. Yeah, we haven't. Yeah, and with all the COVID going on, with all the flu-like symptoms, you're going to have people with adverse events. I mean, look at me. I had a flu. I don't think it was COVID, but it might have been. But if I were in a phase 4 study, I would be showing adverse events this week, and they don't necessarily want that in a phase 4 study during a pandemic.
Yep. All right, we have another question. Can't the sponsor terminate the trial due to lack of participants at the PI office? And certainly, they do this often. It still doesn't negate the fact that you worked on the trial. So if there are questions in regards to research, your PI still has that research. They still are signed on to the trial. If another sponsor looks up, which they can't, but if they can sometimes, look up to see if you participated on this particular trial, they'll see the PI's name there. And again, what I mean by is sometimes they list all sites on clinicaltrials.gov that participated on a study, but usually they don't. And oftentimes, even when they do list all sites, they miss some sites. So they really can't look up who's participated on a study, but if they could, you would be listed. If that's your rationale for asking. But if it's just the way a typical study operates, yes. Sites get removed if they're not enrolling patients eventually. Not always, but usually they do. You get a warning too, typically. If you don't screen a patient in the next month, they're going to remove you from the study.
Oh, yeah. I've been on that end of that phone call a few times.
Yeah, me too. All right. Yes, sponsor can terminate a study due to lack of enrollment. They don't like to pull the plug too quickly because they spent so much to open a site, so they rather have you try to enroll rather than not trying. Yes, that's absolutely true. That's why they afford you the opportunity. They will notify you, hey, if you don't screen or enroll a patient in X time, we're going to have to discontinue your site. They want you to, basically they're just threatening you to try and motivate you to some activity. If you're still not going to do it, then they just kind of lose hope typically. But they definitely will work with you. They oftentimes will even have another CRA come out and, sorry, Dan, what's it called?
Clinical trial educator.
No, the meeting.
Booster visit.
There you go. So they'll come out for a booster visit. That's where they just go over the study with you again, see if there's anything the sponsor can do to help you recruit. They're just trying to get you to motivate you to get to work. But again, this may not be the case. You just may not have patients. We'd love to get to work. We just don't have any patients. And you can tell the CRA that when they come out, hey, is there any way that the sponsor can help us get patients? Are they running any recruitment? Do they offer advertising funds?
Sometimes they do. Sometimes they have a central recruitment campaign that they're running, so they're literally sending leads to the sites too.
Yeah, thank you, James. James says booster visit too. I'm just really tired today. Things are not coming to me. Didn't sleep well last night, so.
Perfectly understandable.
Dan's sick and things are coming to him better.
Well, that's probably due to the meds.
So, I know what a booster visit is. Hell, Dan and I discussed this in our book, but it's just trouble in coming to me. All right, I'm done with that.
You guys have been a great audience. We appreciate it very much. Replay will be sent to everybody, and go out there and make it happen.
Thanks, Jocelyn. We do have one other statement here. James says, feel better, Dan. Irina says, quality indicators include things such as time from site initiation to first patient inclusion, and so on. That is, no sponsor can afford to wait years for the first patient to be included. Yep, that's true. All right.
We love Irina. Irina is, very good at making inroads with doctors, being a physician from Ukraine.
Yeah. All right, feel better, Dan.
Thank you, guys. I am feeling better. I just don't sound like it.
All right, everybody, you're welcome, and we look forward to seeing you next month.
Absolutely. The last webinar of the year, I think it's going to have to be a special one. I just don't know what it's going to be about.
Refer reflection on 2020.
Wow. I mean, we may need like a 8-hour live stream for that one.
Yeah, right?
Honestly, we're blessed to be in this industry. This year has proven that to me.
Oh, yeah. Could you imagine being in the restaurant industry? Even if you're the owner of a successful restaurant, you're hating life right now.
Yeah, if you're the restaurant guru, I don't know what's going on right now with you, but, you know,
Yeah.
I'm just happy to be in this industry where it's important work and definitely pandemic-proof. I don't know about recession-proof, but I don't think anything's recession-proof, but
No,
pandemic-proof, yes.
We've experienced a recession, and this industry certainly is not recession-proof.
Right, but it's among the better ones still,
Sure.
even in a recession.
You lose 50% of your possibilities out there.
Instead of 100.
Yeah.
Yep.
Makes it very competitive then, though.
Strike while the iron's hot, though. Get your research-naive positions now, because I think 2021 is going to be busy. I don't know about 2022. That's when we start getting into speculation. I don't know. I know 2021 is going to be busy.
Nope. I would agree, unless we run into a depression, which who knows when that's going to happen. But hey,
Who knows?
let's not concentrate on the negatives.
Yeah, the topic will definitely not be that in December. But you guys give me your suggestions.
All right, everybody. Thank you for attending, and have a good month if we don't see you before then.
Right, everybody, stay well.
All right, bye-bye.